but right now, you go be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, the ends of the earth. You have a job to do in extending the mighty scepter into people's lives. But the world, that rulership's going to happen in the midst of his enemies. He makes a table for us, Psalm 23, right? In the presence of my enemies. And we're feasting this morning, I hope, on some of the richness and the depth of the incarnation of Christ in the midst of enemies who couldn't care less about our book, couldn't care less about the morality of Christianity, couldn't care less about anything I'm saying this morning. They shine on the truth. And our job is to find out if among those rebels there might be someone that God has prepared for the truth of the gospel, some good soil. When the gospel hits that, it bears fruit. That's all we're trying to do down here. We can't overcome the culture. We can't overcome the world. We're doing the best we can within the jurisdiction we have to do God's will here. But you should never, number two, doubt Christ's current kingship. And there's two things here that help us. Number one, he didn't promise to vanquish our enemies in the current dispensation. He didn't. But he did say, I'm going to change people's lives. The mighty scepter of God, to put it in the words of 2 Corinthians chapter 5, is transforming lives one person at a time. New creations in Christ. Every time I have a baptism, people stand up here and they talk about how God has changed their lives. That's the mighty scepter coming from Zion. But it's all happening surrounded by the enemies of God running amok. Well, God in heaven, it says in Psalm 2, that he laughs. He holds them in derision. He knows their time is coming and they will be squished under the feet of the throne of God. But right now, that's how it's going. And sadly, and I mean it sadly, and I say it sadly because we never take joy in this because God takes no joy. He takes no pleasure in the death of the wicked. Ezekiel 18, no pleasure in that. But here's the thing. You need to understand it can't come, this time of peace, in verse number 7, where the prince is drinking by the brook, as though we're now in peacetime. Can't have that without verses 5 and 6. Look at those verses. The Lord is at your right hand, and he will shatter kings on the day of his wrath. Now, Lord here is Adonai, but Adonai is also the word for God, and it is used of God. And here we have, speaking now of David's Adonai, the Adonai of the Son is now at the right hand of Christ dispatched. And in the margin, you should put Revelation chapter 19, because that's when he's dispatched with on his leg like a motocross rider. Here's the ad, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He's not selling something else. He's selling himself. I am the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and I'm coming back on a horse, and the word of my power is now going to vanquish my enemies. Out of his mouth comes a great sword called the Battle of Armageddon, and he crushes his enemies. What does it look like? It looks like this, shattering kings on the day of his wrath. He will execute judgment among the nations, filling them with corpses, and he will shatter chiefs over the wide earth. This is not a battle that David's going to fight against Assyria or something. This is a battle that is going to take place worldwide. And when that's done, then he will drink from the brook, by the way, and he will lift up his head without a flak jacket on. Because you know what? It'll be peacetime. Called the great millennial kingdom. If you share my eschatology, that's what's going to happen. And he will rule in peace. And David, by the way, resurrected in his resurrection body, will be the prince of the kingdom. Because David will know who he reports to. Someone with toenails, someone with elbows, someone with kneecaps, someone with toes. He's a human being, but he's also fully divine. Never doubt his current kingship because the promise is there. And just like the promise for the first advent took place exactly as it was called, the second advent is coming. And I hate to say it, but the second advent, with no joy in my heart, will start with judgment and war. Now, thankfully, if my eschatology is right, we get to meet the Lord in the air when the first thing he does when he stands up is he takes his church to be with him, to have the marriage supper of the Lamb, the great wedding reception. And we get to enjoy, we get to work our way, sweating our way through the Bema seat, but then we get the great marriage supper of the Lamb. And then he's going to dispatch, still standing, he's going to come back on a white horse, and he's going to end this thing with us, with the saints behind him. But never doubt his current kingship. And if you do, I just want you to think of something I often call your attention to. Think of David's life. Because we're living in the interim between when he was 15 years old and later in his life when he actually became the king. When David was about 15, rough and dirty, Samuel came. Was Samuel a good guy? Yes. Was he completely authorized to do what he did? Yes. God told him to. Go to Jesse's house and find the next king. Saul is rejected. So here's my next king. You go take every boy of Jesse, put him there. I'll tell you which one is the next king. And sure enough, He brings all of his sons, and you know the runt of the family. Someone has to watch the sheep. David doesn't even get called to this by dad. But he finally comes in after Samuel goes, I got no's from God on all your sons. Is that all the sons you have? No, I got one more. So in comes the runt, the red-haired runt. He comes in, and there he is. And God says, that's the king. Take your flask and anoint him. He pulls out his flask, and he pours oil on his head, the ceremonial way to set apart someone either of being a prophet or a priest or a king. And here he is, named the king.